collaboration with the Cyprus Mail. This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
Coming up this week, the Foreign Office wants to know, where do you keep yours?
The key point here is to make sure that your passport is up to date, checked regularly, and in a good condition.
Humanitarian organisations slam the United Nations over Syria.
Every day so much suffering, so much indiscriminate violence, and so much hopelessness for hundreds of thousands of children.
And we'll hear about a relatively unknown governor of Cyprus who was a man before his time.
And until Sendall's time, there had been no natives, as they were called then, on this council at all. And he, funnily enough, from his previous experience in the West Indies, had found that it was very much better to have local opinion at the highest decision-making body, so he pressed for it.
Well, some people might look askance if you ask them, where do you keep yours? But that's a question that the British Foreign Office is asking of its nationals. And they are referring, you may be pleased to know, to passports. The Easter holidays are, of course, fast approaching, and a lot of people travel over the holidays. In Cyprus, of course, we have the 2 Easters coming up, so probably more people travelling to and from the island. And the thing that struck me about the press release from the High Commission here in Cyprus on behalf of the Foreign Office was that they've put out some videos suggesting things you do and don't do with your passport, one of which says, don't place your passport in the microwave. So I had to call the British High Commission, and joining us on the Cyprus News Digest to hopefully tell us how many people actually do that is the spokesman for the British High Commission, Michael Howes. Michael, I mean, we laugh, but seriously, do people put their passports in the microwave? What on earth for?
You'll be surprised about the number of incidents of passports being damaged and, of course, lost that come to the High Commission and to our posts overseas around the world. Now, Cyprus is, of course, a very popular destination for many Brits, and as you rightly pointed out, there are two Easter periods this April, and we'll see a high level of visitors turning up. What we want to see is them turning up to have a safe, fun and enjoyable holiday and not be troubled with damaged passports or lost passports whilst they're in Cyprus enjoying their stay. Now, of course, most holidays and visitors here are problem-free, but every year there are tens of thousands across the globe, people losing their passport, having their passports damaged. And what we want to say in this campaign is simply to look after your passport, keep it safe, and do check it regularly.
Yeah, I mean, I think the figure is approaching 21,000 UK passports reported lost or stolen around the world just last year alone. That's a massive amount. Don't people realise how important it is to keep their passport safe?
It's very important to keep the passport safe. It's a vital travel document, and there are other elements to your passport that people need to be aware of. And the point about checking your passport regularly is to ensure that there are enough pages or there are 6 months validity, because a number of countries have different rules as to their visa requirements. And you'll need to check your passport to ensure that they are up to date to meet those requirements. But in all seriousness, consular staff at the British High Commission are there to help those in genuine trouble and distress. And the more that we can help people look after their own passports, the more that they can help those in genuine need.
Well, they can get, I think, emergency travel documents in the case that their passport is lost. I mean, can you tell us anything about how that works? Suppose I'm here and I'm due to fly home the day after tomorrow, and my goodness me, I look where I left my passport and it's not there. How quickly can you issue an emergency travel document, or might I miss my flight?
An emergency travel document can be issued very quickly, but I must point out it's not a substitute for the real thing and has limitations on its use, and some countries do not accept emergency travel documents. So please check with the High Commission before you need one. The key point here is to make sure that your passport is up to date, checked regularly, and in a good condition.
The other thing that they were discussing was using your passport as a beer mat. I mean, obviously theft and things is probably, if you've tried to keep it safe, not something you can do much about if your bag's snatched or whatever. But should people carry their passports on them, or should they keep copies of their passports on a computer cloud somewhere so that they can at least get online in the event that they've lost it and come to the British High Commission and say, listen, this is the document, it's a copy of it, what do I do?
It's certainly the case that keeping a copy of your passport, the details within your passport, will certainly help when it comes to replacing your passport and reporting that passport lost or stolen. It will help the British High Commission to issue their emergency travel document if that is required, and it will certainly help getting a replacement quicker.
Right, now then, the things that you can and can't help with as consular services, because we've discussed this before on the programme, but a lot of people probably turn to the British High Commission thinking you can work miracles in a lot of areas where you actually can't. So I know there is a website, and I think you've got Facebook and Twitter as well, but can you tell us what the Foreign Office and therefore the representative in each country, whether it's an embassy or a High Commission, can do in terms of helping travellers or expats even who need some sort of assistance, and what you can't do?
The key point for consular staff at the High Commission is help those who are in need and help those in genuine trouble or distress. So staff are there to help provide emergency travel documents, as in this case, if required. They can help provide information or assist those who have had a traumatic experience, whether that is suffering violence or been involved in any difficult episodes whilst they're on holiday, victim of a crime, of that sort of thing. They can help with providing a list of local lawyers and contact you if you're detained overseas, etc. But it's key, what they can't do are things like help organise visas for other countries, for third countries. They can't translate documents for you. They can't investigate crimes or get you out of prison. It's very important to remember that. But I would urge people to go and look at the FCA travel advice whenever they go overseas, abroad, and check our Facebook and Twitter feeds on the internet.
And they can't either pay any bills for you. I mean, if you're left high and dry suddenly, it's no good turning to the British High Commission, is it?
I'm afraid not. The British High Commission are not able to subsidise or pay bills for you or make travel arrangements for you out of the country. That is something that you'll have to arrange with your family or those friends who can assist you.
And all of this, as we said, is on a website. I think that it's the Know Before You Go campaign, and you can find that at www.gov.uk/ all one word, Know Before You Go. Hopefully it'll be a happy Easter holiday for all. Michael Howes, spokesman for the British High Commission in Cyprus, many thanks for joining me.
Get in touch with the Cyprus News Digest by emailing cyprusnewsdigest@gmail.com.
As the Syrian conflict enters its 5th year, millions of refugees, both in neighbouring countries and those who are displaced inside Syria, are being caught in deteriorating conditions. They face an even bleaker future without more international support. Earlier this month, senior officials of the UN's humanitarian system issued a joint statement. They expressed their horror, outrage and frustration as the crisis in Syria enters its 5th year. They restated their commitment as humanitarian leaders and urged world leaders to put aside their differences and use their influence to bring about meaningful change in Syria. Meanwhile, some 21 humanitarian and human rights organisations have released a report. In that, it accuses the UN Security Council of failing to implement the 3 resolutions passed last year, which sought to boost humanitarian assistance to Syrian civilians. They delivered a failing grade for world powers and the broader international community. Joining us on the Cyprus News Digest is Damciu Desalange, who is the head of the UNHCR office here in Cyprus. Damciu, I know people can find the report online, but what basically did it say? It's pretty damning, isn't it?
It is. I think one of the lowest marks for the international community. As you said, the brutal Syrian crisis has entered its 5th year and has produced the worst displacement of people in many decades. 3.9 million refugees, another 2 million people internally displaced or directly, immediately affected by the conflict. Now, these people and others around the globe expect, rightly so, the United Nations to act. But the United Nations is the member states that form it. And these member states have many differences on a number of global issues, including how to resolve the Syrian conflict. But the authors of this report are saying enough is enough. This cannot continue for another year or even for another month. You must act.
And Ban Ki-moon has issued a call to the international community to, in a way, put aside their differences and try and come to some sort of political resolution. Because I suppose you can't go on as a humanitarian agency just dealing with the result of it if you're not dealing with the root cause.
Exactly, I fully agree. And the High Commissioner, Antonio Guterres, has said repeatedly that humanitarian action is not a substitute to political action. And the Syrian conflict needs political action, not just to rely on humanitarian actors to pick up the pieces and look after the displaced, the refugees, and then the families torn apart, and the children growing up without education, and without doing the kinds of things that our kids do. This is simply unacceptable by any standard.
So what is the answer? Because, a lot of aid was promised by the international community, and I think I'm right in saying a lot of it hasn't been forthcoming. They said we'll give this, that and the other, and they've only given part of it. So the humanitarian agencies can't even do the job properly, can they?
We have not received the request we have made. The needs of the people, given the sheer numbers, have always outpaced the response. And our fear is that this may continue also in 2015, because we project, and this only UNHCR with regards to refugees, the number of Syrian refugees to reach 4.3 million by the end of this year. And then the total requirements for Syria, for both refugees and the internally displaced and others, is estimated at $5.5 billion. We are not hopeful all this money will be received.
If we come back to this report, which I think is on the Oxfam website,
correct,
failing grade for world powers, did they pinpoint what they want the world powers to do? Because it's all very well to say we need a political solution, but it's eluded people for 5 years, so one isn't really very hopeful that it'll be coming anytime soon. Are there other areas that maybe action could be taken in?
Small action, small measures could be taken here and there, but unless the essence of the problem is tackled and tackled effectively, that will not bring a lasting peace. That will not bring the change that the suffering Syrians are looking for. And as Oxfam and others have said rightly so, the only solution is for world leaders to put aside their differences and work collaboratively, cooperatively to find a solution, because it is possible, I personally believe, to bring a solution if there is agreement within the Security Council.
What effect, if any, will the current situation in the Yemen have on this? Because there's another area in the region now apparently going up in flames. Will that have an impact in any way?
Yeah, there may not be direct link between what's happening in Syria and Yemen, but our fear is that we may be faced with another humanitarian crisis.
But it's an increase in the general instability in the area, isn't it?
In the whole region. Yes.
So the UNHCR here in Cyprus, how do you coordinate with your partners in Syria and the greater Middle East? Because, of course, there's northern Iraq as well. There's a problem there.
Cyprus has not been affected by the movement of refugees from Syria or Iraq as it has been feared. Although the numbers of Syrian refugees who came in 2014 have increased compared to the previous year by some 500, I think, but that is a significant increase for Cyprus, given its size and population. I mean, overall, the number of asylum seekers increased by around 40%, I think, last year. And generally, that reflects the trend in the EU and Europe as a whole. And then Cyprus can cope with such limited increase if it stays at that level. But anything more, and there is potential for that, may put significant pressure on the country, and therefore the need for meaningful European solidarity and responsibility sharing.
Are you hopeful that this can be resolved? I suppose you can't do your job and not be hopeful.
I must be hopeful.
But
and that's part of my job description.
Realistically, do you see this coming to an end sometime soon?
But how can we be hopeful when we see every day so much suffering, so much indiscriminate violence, and so much hopelessness for hundreds of thousands of children, whether born in Syria or in the asylum countries in Lebanon and Jordan and Turkey? What more, again, as Oxfam and the others have said, what more do we want to see to bring change to the conflict in Syria?
Indeed. That is Damtu Desalange. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. He is the head of the United Nations High Commission for Refugees office in Cyprus.
Keep up to date with events in Cyprus and around the world with the Cyprus News Digest.
The United Kingdom's fourth High Commissioner to Cyprus was a gentleman by the name of Sir Walter Sendall, and Diana Markidis has written his biography. Well, it's rather more than that. It's a historical document showing just exactly what he did while he was Governor of Cyprus. It's called Sendall in Cyprus, 1892 to 1898. Subtitle, A Governor in Bondage. Diana, what does the bondage bit mean?
Well, the bondage refers to his bondage to the Treasury in London. In other words, the Cyprus government at that time, for reasons that are explained in the book, to do with the need to pay the tribute, attached to which there's a long story, meant that the government was always strapped for cash and entirely in thrall to the Treasury in London. In other words, every penny they spent had to be accounted for in London. There's one example in this book where the chief of police needs a second horse, and not for the actual horse itself, which has already been accounted for, but he needs forage for that horse. And in order to be able to buy forage for that horse, a letter has to go to the Treasury, or to the Colonial Office rather, from the Colonial Office to the Treasury. And if they say yes, you can have forage for the second horse, then he can have it. So that's the kind of very frustrating tags that were attached to the government in Cyprus, which made it very difficult for them to act and react quickly.
What comes out of the book is this business of delay, I suppose, pre-internet, when you can just send an email and get a reply back the same day. Everything travelled by ship, so that took ages.
Yes.
But do tell us more about the tribute. This was the tribute paid for the island to the Turks.
Yes, when the Cyprus Convention was signed in 1878, in May 1878, it was followed by a financial agreement, that the surplus revenue of Cyprus, and of course how you calculated what the surplus was, depended on what you were going to spend, so that was a problem in itself. But the surplus revenue, which was going to be an agreed sum, would go, in theory, to the port. But in fact, because the Ottoman Empire had gone bankrupt in 1875 and was in default of a lot of loans to Northern Europeans, rather like Southern Europe is to Northern Europe now, there are a lot of similarities. The Northern Europeans had come into the Ottoman Empire determined to get their money back, or at least get the interest on their loans. And in a bigger study that I'm doing at the moment, I look and examine the possibility that choosing Cyprus was not only a strategic choice, but also had to do with paying this money or getting interest on this money, because it was already paid, half of it was already paid for by Egypt, and they had to find this little tag end. And Cyprus was very much considered an annex to Egypt, strategically as well, but also in terms of finance.
And that meant that Walter Sendall really couldn't spend the money he wanted to, and it seems he was very keen to improve the infrastructure on the island. And because of what he tried to achieve for the Cypriots, he was very popular, wasn't he?
He was very popular indeed. This is one of the extraordinary things about him that made me interested in what he was doing, and I found that nobody knew much about him. This period, that last 10 years of the 19th century, hasn't been studied academically at all. And the more I read about him, the more it seemed worth writing a book about him. So here it is.
And do explain a little bit about the beginnings of cooperation and then non-cooperation between the Turkish Cypriots and the Greek Cypriots. Back then they were called the Christian Cypriots and the Muslim Cypriots, weren't they?
Mm-hmm. The Christians and the Muslims. I think the word Cypriot is probably more modern in that connection, linked up. Yes, they were distinct communities always. There wasn't a sort of amorphous native who was called a Cypriot. They were very much distinct communities from the beginning.
But they lived in harmony, they worked together.
Absolutely, and they lived in mixed villages in a lot of the time and had a lot of common interests, their way of life, which was agricultural. So they had the same concern about high taxes, and the taxes, because of having to pay this tribute, were much higher than they would normally have been. So Sendall found that the Muslims and the Christians did get together to combine against the government when it came to protesting about taxes, but actually not about the tribute itself. And the reason for that is that the tribute for the Muslims and for the Porte, that is for the Turkish government, was related to the continuing Ottoman status of Cyprus, which was very important to the Ottomans and therefore to some extent to the Muslim leaders. Not to every Muslim in every village, I shouldn't imagine, but to the leaders, because they were in contact with Turkey, and it was important for them to maintain this link. So the Christians didn't find cooperation about the tribute, but that's actually a story that doesn't come into Sendall so much. When it came to ordinary taxes, they certainly cooperated. So it was very difficult for the government to get a bill through if both the Christians and the Muslims were against it. They couldn't, in fact.
Yeah, and this is the things that I didn't quite find clear in the book, because it's very difficult to understand exactly how much power Sendall had. He wanted to get certain laws passed here with both the communities, but at the same time, they had to go through London.
That's right. Well, every bill had to be enacted by the local parliament, which you probably know was partially elective. There was a Greek majority, a Christian majority, a Muslim minority, and an official group of British and people that the British appointed who held the balance.
And while Sendall was here, the appointees were very often Cypriot.
The appointees were government officials. The Chief Justice would have been there, for example, the Auditor General, these kind of people. But he also appointed not so much Cypriots. There was somebody called Yanadios, who was a Greek, who had come over from Greece because he was an expert on agriculture to advise the government, and he subsequently became head of the agricultural department, a kind of minister of agriculture. And he, for example, was on, but usually they were English officials in the appointed ones. I think you're confusing them with the appointees to the Executive Council, which is something different.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, the Executive Council is the cabinet, the council that administers. And until Sendall's time, there had been no natives, as they were called then, on this council at all. And he, funnily enough, from his previous experience in the West Indies, had found that it was very much better to have local opinion at the highest decision-making body, so he pressed for it to happen in Cyprus.
And he made it happen.
And he made it happen.
He was
yes.
a man before his time, it seems to me, in terms of the way British government and colonial appointments and administrations worked back then.
Yes, he was. I believe he was extremely liberal, and his wife also. There's a lot of evidence of both the interest of both of them, for example, in female education and enlightenment. Which, when you think about, where Cyprus was and the end of the 19th century, is quite amazing. And what is also amazing is the extent to which the Cypriots themselves responded to this encouragement. And not only was Phanomeni School, which was a girls' school, expanded and advanced and became a teacher training school for female teachers. We're talking about 1890s. But also there are statistics in the book which indicate that the village schools, which expanded enormously during Sendall's time with his encouragement, that's one thing he's very fondly remembered for by the Cypriots, also quite often sent their girls to school as well. So they weren't just at home peeling potatoes, they were really learning as well, which is quite something. Not obviously the same number as boys. There were always far more boys, especially at secondary level.
But it was a start.
But it was a start. And, when you think that even today in this part of the world a lot of women don't get an education, I think it's quite something.
What do you draw, after all the research that you did for this book, in terms of what you think he did for Cyprus? They were very upset here when he left.
Yes, they tried very hard to keep him here. But, of course, the appointments in London were not made according to what the people in the colonies wanted, but according to what suited the colonial office. So the Cypriots went to tremendous trouble to get petitions from every town and every village and send them and
they even went to London, didn't they?
Yes, they went to London for a different reason. They didn't go to London to keep because of Sendall. They went to London much earlier. That was an extraordinary event as well. But I believe that one of the things they liked about him was that he cooperated with them. And it was very clear that he was doing his utmost to improve the financial situation in the island and the constitutional situation. He was willing to collaborate with them. He had a very close relation with some of the Cypriot legislative councillors, MPs, if you like. And one of the Makilas Liasidis then becomes a very famous mayor of Nicosia as well. So what they liked about him was that he was effective and he actually worked for Cyprus.
And he stuck his neck out in London a few times to do it, didn't he?
He stuck his neck out in London as well. And I think it's quite extraordinary that nobody knew about him. And I'm very, very glad that there has been the kind of reaction that there has to this book and that more people are finding out that British rule in Cyprus at that time was really quite spectacularly better than it had been in the past.
Yeah, because he took over from somebody who was pretty useless.
Somebody who certainly wasn't prepared to stick his neck out, let's put it like that.
Well, it's a fascinating story and it's nice to have it in print finally. So where can people get the book, Diana?
Well, I believe most of the bookshops certainly in Nicosia, and I hope in Limassol by now have it as well. Mouflon is the publishers, so that's a very good place to go. But you can also buy it online, either through Mouflon, Amazon, or just Google Sendall and it'll pop up.
That's Sendall in Cyprus, 1892 to 1898. It is a fascinating tale of the history of this island, A Governor in Bondage by Diana Markides. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.